Hello, I'm Pastor Thomas at Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church in Santa Barbara, California. This video is the third in a series we are calling Art as Witness, a series of art exhibitions showcasing the experiences and history of African Americans in the United States. Last week, we focused on the work entitled Martin Luther King by Ulysses Davis, a wood sculpture carved around the time of the Reverend Dr. King's assassination. Davis captures King's humanness and witness to the hardships and hopes of his fellow African Americans in this sculpture. This week, we turn our attention to a work of historical objects by the artist Fred Wilson. It's a dialogue piece, created to juxtapose objects to showcase and invite conversation about the historical realities of slavery and wealth in pre-Civil War Maryland. Again, Professor Judy Larson has provided background and commentary on the work. Dr. Larson writes, "Museums preserve history by collecting the objects people made and used in different periods of time. The artist Fred Wilson, who trained in museology, was invited to the Maryland Historical Society to search through their collections and create an exhibition of various historical artifacts. Objects, when they're arranged, can be read when a visitor comes to a museum, the viewer of said displays, and they bring questions to the artifact. Who made this? For whom was it intended? How was it used? Does it carry associations with a specific person or a specific group? When a curator installs an exhibition, objects are paired or placed in groups to create a dialogue between the objects. Wilson incites interesting new dialogues to open visitors' eyes to a variety of objects and how pairings, labels, texts, and even dramatic lighting help rouse a different context or new interpretation. Scholars may try to be objective and non-biased, but we all bring our own histories and prejudices, even to the museum. Through his art, Wilson questions assumptions that visitors make when viewing museum artifacts. Wilson goads the viewer to explore multiple narratives. He makes the viewer aware that history has many points of view. When our perspective shifts, our judgment of history also shifts. So Wilson asks, is there historical truth, or is history the combination of many stories that intersect and at times even clash? Wilson explains, museums ignore and often deny the other meanings of artifacts. In my experience, it is because if an alternate meaning is not the subject of an exhibition or the focus of the museum, it is considered unimportant by the museum. Wilson began his installation by spending time in the vault of the Maryland Historical Museum, finding connections and juxtapositions between objects that told interesting stories. For example, at the entrance to his exhibition were 6 pedestals, 3 painted white and displaying busts of Napoleon, the French emperor and so-called liberator and democratizer of Europe, who built a large empire through military might. Andrew Jackson, the general who won the Battle of New Orleans after the end of the War of 1812, and who won the popular vote to become President of the United States and lobbied for the common man and male suffrage, who also supported extending slavery into the Western territories. And also then Henry Clay, author of the Missouri Compromise, which attempted to keep pro- and anti-slavery factions balanced. None of these 3 famous persons you'll be interested to know were born or lived in Maryland. The other 3 pedestals opposite these were painted black and had no busts, only labels, reading Frederick Douglass, Benjamin Banneker, and Harriet Tubman. All 3 are well-known African Americans hailing from Maryland, but strangely enough, were not represented with sculptural busts in the museum's collection. Frederick Douglass escaped slavery in Maryland and became a persuasive orator against slavery, and his speech on the 4th of July is trending now. Benjamin Banneker was an 18th century African American mathematician, scientist, and inventor who dialogued with Benjamin Franklin. And of course, Harriet Tubman was an abolitionist and heroine of the Underground Railroad. By arranging these objects, Wilson begs the question, What place do these three Marylanders have in the permanent collection of the museum? This is an example of the sort of dialogue piece Wilson is known for. Today our focus is on his museum installation entitled Metalwork. It evokes questions about the consumer, or the person for whom each object was produced. As you can see, Wilson combined in the same vitrine an ornate silver service with a pair of iron slave manacles. All are crafted from metal. Their functions seem totally distinct and from different worlds. But they are not from different worlds. The installation asks, would the beautiful silver, a hallmark of a wealthy family, have been possible without the manacles of slave labor that made the flourishing economies of the agricultural South possible? In our time, when we are asking the tough questions and uncovering the history of racial subjugation that did not end with the Emancipation Proclamation, nor even after the executive branch was occupied by a black person, museum arrangements such as these present us with the opportunity to question the history many of us have long been taught. History is far from being dates and battles, and history was never simply a matter of ink and paper. Life is history. And how we answer the tough questions, how we come to terms with harsh realities, reveal our part in the history we hope for. Take, for example, the history of Napoleon, whose conquest of the German states was at first lauded by Beethoven for its liberating mission. And then, when the hope for fellowship, equality, and liberty for all people failed, as the self-crowned Emperor Napoleon rose to power, and he resumed the long-standing history of autocracy and oligarchy, he was decried by the same composer in the same opera he had written to praise Napoleon. Our sense of history is not determined by romanticizing life in the past, but comparing it to the life in the present. People in the past were not romantic figures, but real-life people. We cannot change the history of our nation or the lives of people in the past, but we can, by appreciating an unfamiliar perspective of history, change the lives we live and the life we have together. We can affect a new history. If nothing else, that is the point of the gospel of Christ proclaimed to us, that the sins of the past are forgiven, and repentance is a gift of change and process started when God gives us perspective on reality. It's as if to say, see things from my view and sin no more. We are currently in a place where we are questioning how we will move forward as a nation. According to the author and historian Shelby Foote, there are events like the American Civil War that point to the unity forged in times of struggle. We are at another of those points, when our unity as a nation depends on our rising above the ways of past lives and living into the future as new people. In a time when harvests are tossed in the garbage to keep prices level, while people are struggling to live easily and people are hungry, we have to see the dialogue created by the objects of our time. We only receive that perspective when what we know and what we learn is rearranged to showcase the truths we have left out of our history books.